Today on Anthro-Dish, I'm interviewing Rylee Booroff. Originally hailing from Oshawa, Ontario, Rylee is a retired dance artist and aspiring mental health professional. She currently lives in the beautiful Halifax, Nova Scotia. Rylee managed a vegan restaurant in Toronto prior to moving to Halifax. In her spare time, she enjoys hanging outside, serenading her doggo Capone, who's super cute, and drinking cocktails out of fancy glassware. Rylee has been following a vegan lifestyle for just over 8 years and is thrilled to be sharing her story on Anthro-Dish. In today's episode, we sit down and talk about her experiences as a vegan and its lasting impact on her life and her well-being. We explore whether or not veganism's popularity is lasting or if it's just, trendy in North America. We explore the Halifax plant-based scene and what makes a healthy sock. And I know you're super curious about that last one. Welcome, Rylee.
Thank you.
So to start off, can you give us some quick background about who you are and what sorts of experiences or moments influenced your decision to become a vegan?
Definitely. So I'm the middle child of a wonderful family of 5. I grew up in Oshawa, Ontario. I'm currently living in Halifax, Nova Scotia. I hold 2 undergrads, a dance degree from York University and a specialized honors in sociology as well from York University. My journey into veganism sadly wasn't really motivated by the best or healthiest intentions, and it's a bit of a longer story, but just bear with me and I'll share it with you.
That's why we're here.
Thanks. So up until I was 17, I had honestly never really blanked about what I had ate. Whatever was around, whatever was in sight, whatever was served to me, I ate it. Growing up as a competitive dancer and dancing for over 30 hours every week, I was always active and fit. So maintaining fitness was really never on my radar, especially at such a young age. I didn't really start paying attention to my diet or anything like that until a kind of a pivotal moment in my last year of high school at a high school party. A strange place, I feel like, to have a moment of revelation when it comes to diet. But during this party, for whatever reason, I can't remember, and under the influence of probably a couple of Smirnoff Ices, my best friends and I decided to all weigh ourselves in the bathroom. Again, I have really no idea why we did this, and I truly don't believe it was with any ill intent. Like, we all thought it was something fun to do. Anyways, I was standing there and watched as each of us took our turns, kind of noting the numbers that appeared on the scale: 120 pounds, 115 pounds, 125 pounds. Nothing, I honestly, truthfully didn't really care about it. It was all a blur. Again, like, I had never really paid any attention to myself or my diet or my shape. I hopped on the scale with 0 hesitations and watched as the scale displayed 137 pounds. Now, 137 pounds is by no means overweight, especially for my stature and my height at that time. Mm-hmm. And looking back now, I'm sad for 17-year-old me who was so concerned and upset by these 3 little digits. I just remember this moment so vividly because it was for the first time in my life that I actually felt embarrassed by my body. I remember my heart leaping, and you can feel the heartbeat in my ears, and I felt my face heat up. I just felt so embarrassed. And I remember one of my friends looking at me and saying, "Oh, that's so strange. You don't look like you're 137 pounds. And I feel like she probably said that to try and comfort me because my discomfort was probably becoming so obvious. I remember just feeling so uncomfortable in that moment and just feeling so shook at my body, and that I just wondered, how could I have been so oblivious to my weight gain? And after that day, I kind of began a pattern of what I would say now, especially looking back, as disordered eating. I've never been formally diagnosed with an eating disorder, but like I said, now that I reflect back and looking at the patterns and what I was eating and what I was avoiding, I would say that it's definitely a form of disordered eating. I had it in my mind at that time, as soon as I saw 137 pounds, that I need to lose 15 pounds for prom. And my methods for accomplishing this, sadly, weren't the healthiest. I remember every day throwing out half of my lunch that my mom had packed for me so nicely every morning. I remember lying to my parents about dinner, secretly telling my dad that I had already ate and just avoiding eating altogether, then going to dance class for 5 hours and practically working on an empty stomach. I remember constantly refusing desserts and substituting dried mangoes and soy milk for a nutritious dinner. I remember curbing hunger pains with copious amounts of gum. In the end, I did end up meeting my weight loss goal. And I remember my mom cursing me for losing so much weight before prom and having to get it tailored a week before. Unfortunately, meeting my target weight, though, was never enough. And my obsession with, losing weight and being skinny carried into my first year of university. finally free of my mother's grocery hauls. In my first year, I was free to pick out whatever I wanted. So for me, this meant 0-calorie salad dressings, reduced fat yogurts, reduced fat mayonnaise, and literally eating dry chicken breast and veggies for dinner every day and every night. I only allowed myself to drink dessert, which ended up being a hot chocolate from Tim Hortons, maybe twice a week. And on Fridays, I treated myself before lecture to a bran muffin. After a year of obsessing over my weight and feeling the pressures to look more and more like a professional dancer, then eating what I would argue is probably the world's most boring diet, I decided to invest more research. So I went to Chapters and I looked in the diet section and I found this book called Skinny Bitch. I don't know if you've ever heard it.
Yes.
It's by Rory Friedman and Kim Barnewen. And I remember reading it and it made me laugh. And I think that's what drew me to it the most, because it was such a hilarious read. And as I was flipping pages and pages, I was always laughing. And it made me so intrigued. But beyond their like salty language and their attitude, the message that they were saying essentially was to avoid all animal products because they'll make you fat. That's a less eloquent version of what they said. But everything they said, I was eating it up. I was like, yes, okay. And the title in itself sold me. I was like, yes, absolutely. I want to be a skinny bitch. Like, this is why I'm here, Chapter. So I just kept reading and reading. And then after I had read this book, I decided to read a little bit more, and I started reading The Kind Diet by Alicia Silverstone.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And her message was, I would say, it was more about being more aware of what we're eating and what we're consuming, not necessarily to get skinny, but to be your best self and to be, most energetic and just to feel the greatest. And that message really resonated with me. And I especially, after I started adopting this vegan diet, I really saw the changes and I felt the changes. It took a while too for people around me to support me. I remember coming home for Christmas and my family thought I was crazy. Like, they were like, what do you mean vegan? Like, I don't know what this is. I remember my Oma saying, what is that? Like, she'd never heard of it.
How do I cook for that?
She thought I was crazy too. She grew up on literally like meat and potatoes and everything is in butter. So she was like, I don't know like what you're gonna eat like ever. And I was like, it's gonna be okay. Oh my, I've got my books and I've got this online resource group and I'm gonna make it happen. And now, like 7 years later, I'm still vegan.
And thriving.
Yeah, it never really started with the intention of sticking. Like, I kind of saw it at the time as a diet, as like a trial thing, but like I had mentioned before, I just started feeling the benefits right away, and it stuck with me. And I think maybe because I never intended it to be this like really permanent change, for some reason it was easier to adopt it. I'm not sure. I'm not really sure. Yeah, but it's just stuck with me now. And like I said, here I am, still vegan.
Well, I think, first of all, thank you so much for sharing that story, especially in terms of struggling with body and disordered eating, because I feel like, a lot of listeners, and myself included, resonate with that story at that young high school age of like really starting to, see your body and understand it and kind of I find like you become more conscious at that age of, your weight or your shape or how people perceive that. And it sounds like, like when you kind of stumbled into veganism, that sounds like one of those first places that kind of took you in and was able to like help you get through that and like work through that in a really beautiful way.
Definitely. Yeah. It was a more positive journey to what I had wanted to be weight loss, but really ended up just being a total like lifestyle revolution for me. After I started reading more about like the ethics behind the meat industry and the dairy industry, the motivation no longer just became about weight loss. It became about being conscious about what it is and who it is I'm supporting. Like I said, it became like a much bigger picture for me that started to disseminate into different pockets of my life to beyond just my diet. I started making sure that I was buying vegan-friendly shampoos and moisturizers, and was I supporting cosmetic brands that supported testing on animals and that sort of thing. It just became a really positive change for me, and yeah, investing in yourself is always something exciting. And it was the first time that I felt like I had really uh, looked at taking care of myself in a positive light rather than trying to restrict my diet, but rather to, feed and fuel my body.
Which is really beautiful because so often, especially for young women, it's very hard to move away from that restriction, and it's very hard to move into a place of caring for your body, and not even just for yourself, but caring for your environment and your community on top of that. So that's really beautiful.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you again for sharing. All right, so I'm going to move to my next question. So I find on social media, there are a lot of terms thrown around, especially on Instagram, kind of relating to veganism. So I wanted to touch base with you, and one term in particular that we hear a lot is the term plant-based. So I wanted to see what does it mean to be plant-based, or how do you think that term is kind of understood in the vegan community, and does it differ from being vegan or not so much?
Yeah, I definitely feel like there's a difference between the two terms. To me, I feel like if someone says that they're plant-based, that means that they're referring strictly to their diet, that they follow a plant-based diet, meaning they only consume plant-based products. If you're vegan, I feel like that means that it goes beyond the scope of what you're eating into all areas of your life. So beyond consuming animal products, you're also maybe avoiding wearing them. You avoid supporting companies that treat animals unfairly or that test on animals. Maybe you spend extra time hunting down vegan-friendly shampoos and conditioners and body moisturizers. For me, I feel like being vegan is more of a lifestyle, whereas if being plant-based is maybe more of a reference strictly to your diet.
That's great. Thank you so much for kind of illuminating that, because I find, I've been a vegetarian now for, I think, about 8 years, and I still can't really place what plant-based means relative to my identity or other identities. So I think that's a really good definition to kind of work off of.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, that's how I understand it. And I feel like a lot of people do use veganism and plant-based interchangeably, but people who maybe are looking to have a more solid definition of their diet or their lifestyle would probably, I would say what I was saying earlier.
I like that. And I like that differentiation between diet and lifestyle, because that is huge, but you don't necessarily think about that when you're not pursuing a vegan lifestyle, right?
Yeah, no, not at all. I feel like, when I first started my journey into veganism, I would say it was more on the idea of being plant-based. But then when I started doing more research, I encompassed what I would now call a vegan lifestyle.
Very nice. Good operationalizing of that, as the science would say. All right, so going beyond your personal lifestyle and dietary choices, you actually have a lot of experience working in restaurants that are plant-based or plant-friendly or vegan, and have lots of menu items that reflect that. So in your experiences, have you seen a lot of growth in plant-based restaurants or lifestyles? What are some of the main trends in these spheres lately?
So to answer your first part of that question, I would say there's definitely been a huge boom in veganism or plant-based diets. I'd say that in the whole last years that I've been vegan, that it's really blown up. Maybe I'd say in the last 2 years or so, give or take. When I was living in Toronto, I feel like that was really evident by the mass amounts of plant-based restaurants opening up, especially even now in the variety of the restaurants themselves that are opening up. So now it's not just, hey, we're a vegan restaurant, but now it's, hey, we're a vegan pizza ice cream place, like the Apocalypse on Bloor Street. They have specialty vegan food, which I feel like really shows the demand and the interest in plant-based lifestyles. It's not just, I'm looking for anything vegan. I'm looking for something a specific item. There's Bunners now too that has donuts, or sorry, no, it's not Bunners. It's
Bloomers and Bunners, I guess.
Bloomers,
both.
Yeah. I feel like Bunners, now they're just a vegan bake shop. So I feel like the specializing is also a sign of the interest and the demand out there. In terms of trends in being vegan, I think that's something I've noticed more so lately is people trying to avoid processed foods in vegan diets. Earlier, I think it was pretty much whatever you could get your hands on that could be vegan. So you'd likely be eating a lot of processed food. Usually what happens in things like fake cheeses and fake meats, there is a lot of extra, maybe not so body-friendly oils or really just really heavily processed, which can be really difficult on the body to digest. So I think maybe there's been a bigger shift lately to more of like a whole foods, plant-based diet, avoiding things that are really sugar laden or like really highly chemically processed or white flours and things like that. And yeah, adopting, I guess, more of a whole foods outlook on veganism. But on the flip side of that, I feel like there's also a lot of really cool new companies coming out with really interesting, usually heavily processed products. But it's so exciting for people who are vegans because there's things I haven't had in so long that now I'm like, oh my God, someone's finally veganized this, that I'm like, yes, thank goodness. So it's hard. I feel like right now we're still in such an early phase in veganism that it's hard to say that like what are the specific trends in veganism itself, because I feel like people just adopting a vegan lifestyle is still so new.
Yeah, very true. But I think it's what you're speaking about in terms of the whole food diets. I find like if you just think about, what whole food stores or like health stores look like even, 10 years ago, the availability of like meat alternatives was very scarce in comparison to what you're seeing now. So
Definitely.
yeah, so it's exciting in that sense where you finally have more choice, but then you also have the ability to kind of move back towards those not fuller foods, but like more nutritionally.
Yeah, no, definitely. There's
Dense.
definitely a focus. I feel like even beyond being vegan, I would say that following that like whole food diet is definitely a trending thing. And speaking more to veganism too, like for meat substitutes, I feel like people are constantly finding really unique ways to incorporate whole foods rather than just constantly using soybeans and some type of soy byproduct. They're choosing to use legumes, like something interesting with chickpeas or lentils and that sort of thing. So kind of shifting that focus again back to being a meat substitute, but also still being good for you.
Yeah, certainly. I think a really good example of that we kind of were talking about a couple weeks ago was oat milk emerging as like a big alternative because it's got a full serving of calcium and a lot of fiber in it. So you're finally getting these milks that don't taste awful and they have all these things in them that are good for you, and you finally feel like you have that that option.
Yeah, it's nice to find that balance, it feels like.
Okay, hold on a second. Fact checker and sound guy Lucas here. I just pulled the oat milk out of the fridge, and unless you plan on drinking 1 liter of this stuff every single day, you're not going to meet your daily calcium requirements. Oat milk supplies you with about 30% of your daily calcium needs per 250 milliliter serving. Could I have just edited out that mistake? Sure. But I also relish the opportunity to embarrass Sarah whenever I can. All right, I'm done.
All right, so you were recently interviewed by the Toronto Star, and you were asked to comment on the findings of a new study that was put out by Dalhousie researchers. So I'm just going to read a little bit of background on the study that they were looking at and a quote from your interview. So the study suggested that people under the age of 35 were 3 times more likely to consider themselves vegetarian or vegan than those who are over 49. In it, you were quoted as saying, "Health is everything now. We work it into everything. We work it into the clothes we buy, the socks we wear. People want to do their best by their bodies, and being healthy is now a lifestyle." So can you break this sentiment down for us a little bit? What do you think makes a healthy sock?
I feel like that phrase was definitely paraphrased, but I feel like they're probably doing me a favor because I was just rambling incessantly. But what I really mean by the healthy sock was just a random example, but the idea of health being worked into every product that we can buy now is really apparent, I feel like, in this day and age. And I just use clothing as an example because I feel like it's something you don't think about. I feel like when people think of healthy, they think of diet and they think of exercise, but we've taken it beyond that scope. So now you can buy specific clothes that are healthier. You can buy sweat wicking material. You can buy odor absorbent material. You could even just wear organic cotton. So now you're not wearing cotton that's been treated with pesticides and chemicals. You can shop consciously at H&M from their conscious collection. Those are just some examples. I mean, like where we use health as a way to not only market a lot of products, but we can take health beyond the scope of just diet. They say to sleep in cotton sheets is better than to sleep in silk because it's healthier for you because your skin can breathe more. Trying to think of some other examples here. Hairspray that doesn't have aerosol in it, or we can even infuse quinoa and stuff like that into our shampoos, where we say we're making them healthier. So that's kind of what I meant by a healthy sock thing. I was really, I think at the time, thinking about compression socks and like how people wear those because it's healthier for you to wear them. But it was just like, in my mind, a random example of what you would think is just like a random purchase, but the undertone of that purchase is, hey, this is actually healthier for me. I'm going to be a healthier person if I purchase these organic hemp socks or something like that.
Yeah, and I think, like, all jokes aside about the sock, I find, like, when I read that quote in the article, I immediately understood what you were getting at, because it's such a undercurrent to our society now, where all of a sudden in the past 5-10 years, we've started to become much more conscious of, what we buy, what we eat, everything that we're doing, and like who's kind of producing those materials that we're buying. Yeah. So it's a really interesting time to be alive and to, like, I mean, that sounds kind of corny, but
no, it is. No, to be a consumer, it's an interesting time, because it's not necessarily now, I feel like, about what's new and exciting. It's about how is your purchase necessarily going to better you? Is this purchase going to, I don't know necessarily increase your health, but that is the motivation, I feel like, behind a lot of purchases. A lot of, like, anything, I feel like these days.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into the next question that I was going to ask. So do you see plant-based lifestyles as a lasting shift in our culture, or do you see it as like something that's kind of gained significance lately, but it's only going to kind of phase out in terms of it being a trend?
I don't know. I feel like it's really tough. Even though I want to say that it's going to be a lasting shift, there is some
use your vegan psychic powers.
Yeah. There is part of me that feels like it might just be a temporary trend, as are most diets, like at one point it was the Atkins diet. At one point it was, I think, that beach body diet or something. And people see veganism, or I guess I should say more like plant-based diets, as a diet. They don't necessarily, maybe it's not a permanent thing for them. And also you think about the longevity of veganism, I guess, in terms of how it's coming into the spotlight now, how many studies can be done on vegans in terms of long-term or short-term benefits, if there are going to be serious health problems linked to being vegan. I'm sure there's going to be someone out there that's going to say, if you're going to be vegan, you're going to be insufficient in protein, and then you're going to be more susceptible to developing this type of chronic disease and whatnot. So I feel like, as much as I want to say it's a long-lasting thing, I feel like eventually someone's going to do a bunch of studies on it, and maybe they'll try and shoot veganism down. Or the other option I was thinking is that a lot of people are vegan or because they don't want to support factory farming. So then the other idea I was thinking is maybe farmers will pay more attention to how they are farming, their methods, if they're being ethical, the treatment of animals. Maybe if farmers took more consideration into how they're raising their livestock, maybe less people would be interested in being vegan. I feel like it always depends on the motivation behind why it is you've chosen this diet. Are you doing it just for health reasons? Are you doing it because, you can't stand the idea of eating flesh? Like, it's really hard. It's really hard to understand everyone's motivation behind it. I've always thought to myself, like, hey, is there ever going to be a time when I'm not going to be vegan anymore? Like, I feel like I ask myself that all the time. Every time I see a Tim Hortons sprinkled donut, I'm like, God, is this the day I give it up? and then I'm like, I don't know. For me, I feel like it's a permanent thing, because I now I never want to eat anything that has a face. And that's not just because it has a face, but it's more of like the feelings that that thing once had. And I don't know, the whole process of killing animals the way that we do in factory farms, specific settings, for me is so upsetting that I don't want to consume animals. But maybe if I found a farmer who, really took care and consideration of their livestock, maybe that would persuade me to eat meat again. But this also comes from a place where I would say a place of privilege. The fact right now that I can sit here and contemplate, do I want to be vegan forever or do I not? Not everybody has this luxury to sit here and debate what it is they want to eat, or the ability to choose to avoid eating food. I feel like that's something that gets lost so often in veganism.
Yes.
Like people are always, I feel like they're just shoving veganism down people's throats. As someone who's been vegan for as long as I have, and on behalf of some of the quieter vegans out there, like I don't feel like those really crazy vegan protests outside of places like Antler in Toronto, stuff like that, are really productive. I feel like if anything, they paint a poor image of being vegan, and it's like this really aggressive message.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I shared this article on my Facebook. It's a CBC article. Sarah Bond. I remember sharing this article and I remember reading it and being like, man, Sarah is spot on. And she was saying that the message should be more about conscious consuming rather than meat is murder. And that to me just really resonated. And I thought, yeah, that's great. And beyond that message too, she said, you really have to think about what it means to be able to choose what you can eat, or things such as tradition within family and whatnot, your background, your culture. Like there's so many things that come into our diet, so many little things that work into that I just don't know. It's so hard to say if veganism will be here to stay or not.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So your answer is fantastic. There's so many things that I just want to break down a little bit because you had so many fantastic ideas in there. So the first thing that came to mind when you're talking about, kind of waiting to hear back on what science is saying about veganism down the road. Mm-hmm. So as an anthropologist, I'm connected with people that do study food and diet. Surprise, because that's what this podcast is about. But I have one colleague in particular, Dana Hart, and I will link some of their stuff in the show notes below, because they looked at they were looking at vegan blogs, and I remember a big struggle when they were doing their research was that there really isn't a lot of nutritional knowledge about vegetarianism or veganism in the literature. So in terms of health benefits, or in terms of long-term lifestyles and how that affects your body or certain processes within your body, there's really not a lot out there. And I think it's starting to change. But even, I remember when I was pregnant, a big part or a big issue of me being pregnant was that I was vegetarian, and the nutritionist didn't know how to handle that because they're not trained to understand a vegetarian diet. So I think that's going to be, I think the work is obviously being done from the study that was done in Dalhousie and the stuff that Dana Hart's doing and some other people. And yeah, it's going to be really interesting, but I think it's sometimes I worry because I don't know what the bias is going to be on that too, right? It depends on how you feel ultimately about veganism or vegetarianism when you're doing that research, or maybe it doesn't.
Yeah, definitely. I don't know like you said, it's a huge problem, I would say, or just it's a huge gap in the answers, really. You don't really know. And for the longest time, when I first started being vegan too, everyone was like, oh my gosh, you're going to be sick all the time. You're going to be so frail. Everyone was so concerned for my health. Your hair is
going to fall
out. Yeah, everyone was just it was literally I had made this choice to, I don't know, commit to chronic illness for the rest of my life. And I was like, no, everyone, I'm okay. And it's funny too, because now it's been 8 years and I'm like, hey, everyone, still standing. I'm still okay. I don't want to be rude and shove it down their throats, but everybody is, I feel like maybe not so much lately, but at first everybody was so eager to tell me that I shouldn't do it and can't do it. And that happens so often when anybody tries to instigate change or tries to introduce something new too,
Yeah,
and
sure.
especially with things out there such as Canada's Food Guide. I think it did recently change, but
It did, yeah.
At the time, it was like that pyramid, you know, you got to have your dairy, you got to have your meat. And everyone was like, what are you going to do without this pyramid? You're going to crumble. But I was like, I'll be okay. Yeah, so everybody just couldn't really wrap their head around it. But my other thought process behind this whole health thing is there are people around the world that survive on so much like less choice and so little. And, you know, maybe I definitely think there is a strong link between food and overall health. And like, absolutely, I'm not arguing that at all. But maybe, I feel like sometimes we don't extend our bodies enough credit to how much we can adapt, how we can change, how our bodies can really thrive for so long, maybe off of one thing. I just think about people who are in this world who, just don't get to have a meat and a green veggie and a starch in every meal. And, you know, they're living a long life. And I can't speak to how healthy they are, but I just feel like, I don't know. I just feel like maybe we just don't know enough about it. We really don't know enough about it.
That's
and like
true.
in your situation, particularly, you know, being pregnant, I can only imagine how frustrating that is, because it's like, what do they ask you to try and change, which I feel like they probably do, and then it's like questioning your morals and your choices, and it's really problematic. And it's maybe not even necessarily a reflection of what your doctor wants for you, but just what they're equipped to handle. Like they don't know any different, so they can't really, like you said, they can't prescribe or handle your situation.
Yeah, and I find it really fascinating. I think that was kind of the first moment where my eyes were open to, you know, I fully understand and appreciate Western medicine, and I'm not going to disagree with anything, but that was the first time where I noticed like there was a boundary to knowledge. Okay, so I'm going to switch into my next question. All right, so you lived in Toronto not so long ago. Which is known to have many plant-based and health-conscious restaurants, cafes, juice bars, pretty much everything that you could ever want. It might be easy to see these shifts towards plant-based diets more readily in a big city like this. So I wanted to talk about your experiences in Halifax after coming from Toronto. Do you find that plant-based foods are readily available or widely focused on there, or not so much in a marine sort of environment?
I wouldn't say that they are necessarily widely focused on or necessarily readily available. However, the growth in the vegan community and plant-based diets over here has definitely grown exponentially, especially over the last 4 years. So I actually lived in Halifax in 2014 as well. And I stayed here for a year, and I came over here and I was vegan then. And I remember coming here and literally having like 2 or 3 options for places that I could go. Fortunately, with the year I had moved here, this place, there's a restaurant here called Envie, which is strictly a vegan restaurant, and they had just opened up, and that was like my safe haven, really. And then beyond Envie, there was a place called Heartwood, and then I could also get vegan options at the Wooden Monkey here. And when I would enter a place that didn't have veganism on their radar, or didn't have like a vegan option listed on their menu, people would quite literally not know like what I was talking about. So I stopped using the term vegan a lot, and I was just like, I don't eat dairy or meat. Like, do you have any options for me? And even at that point too, I feel like people were like, oh no, definitely not. Like, you know, we put dairy in all of our vegetable dishes and whatnot. And I was like, okay, cool. And I was so shy and so, I don't want to say ashamed, but I never wanted to make someone do more work than they really needed to do. I wanted to be like a very pleasant diner. And I think that just comes from me from years working in the hospitality industry and just knowing like how challenging, exactly, you know, how challenging some challenging orders are, and the eye rolls that you get and the chefs that are cursing in the kitchen. And I'm just like, okay, you know, like I'll just take like a green salad with balsamic dressing, and it would be fine, but it would be kind of painful to eat and definitely not satisfying. But coming back here now, so I returned to Halifax in 2017, and I have seen such a huge shift now. Yeah, even how much busier Envy is. Heartwood has now opened up a second look, actually 3 locations, which is really crazy. The Wooden Monkey, now I feel like the demand for when people come in, I work there, so it's easy for me to shed light on this, but when people come in, the amount of people that are asking for vegan options or asking for their meal to be veganized has just skyrocketed. So I feel like over here, I've really noticed a shift. They say that like Halifax or like Nova Scotia is like 10 years behind like places like Toronto, which it might be, especially in terms, I feel like, of veganism, maybe in diet trends and whatnot. But yeah, I feel like things are definitely blossoming over here. There's a new company that just started too, which I'm super excited about, called Real Fake Meats. And they actually are doing like vegan meat delivery service, and they deliver things called butcher boxes. And
Whoa.
they have created all of these amazing handcrafted meats. And they're brand new. They just started doing orders in May. But I feel like for a company to take a leap of faith and to open up something like that, again, really sheds light on the demand for vegan food. And they sold out within, I think, 2 days.
Oh my gosh.
And that's crazy, right? Like, I feel like that, again, speaks volumes about how people are interested, maybe not necessarily in being vegan, but, just like plant-based food. Maybe some people are trying to adopt meatless Mondays more or whatnot. But health food stores, I feel like, have opened up more here. People have at least taken time to include a vegan option on their menu, which again is another saving grace.
Not just French fries.
Yeah, like, I feel like it's definitely blowing up a lot more here.
Yeah, it definitely seems like, from what you're saying, it sounds like it, which is really beautiful.
Yeah, it's great for me.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it also, like, you kind of hit on this too, but there are so many more people that are, not necessarily giving up meat entirely, but making more conscious decisions, as we were talking about earlier, and like being more aware of what meat they choose, or when they don't choose to eat meat, what sorts of meals they're having, which is also really cool.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like I've noticed this more over here, and I think it's because it's a smaller town than I did in Toronto, but there's such a strong demand, I feel like, for farm to table food over here. And I think that's true in Toronto as well. But I feel like my relationship to food over here is much more intimate than it was in Toronto. I feel like in Toronto, I was just going to a restaurant, or, I'd roll into Sobeys Express and just grab something from the aisles here. But there's so many farmers markets over here, and people just really take a lot of time in making sure that they're supporting local farmers here. And I think that's really nice. At our restaurant, we only support local farmers for any of our meat and products, which I think is really great. We actually even have the option as employees to go visit farms at, we can go actually visit the actual source and see the animals, which for me, as someone who doesn't consume animals, I feel like it's just it really goes to show how confident people are in their practices, that they know that their product is good. They know how they're caring for the animals is ethical. I just feel like there's such a stronger sense over here of having a relationship to farmers over here than I experienced in Toronto. And I think that itself is an important step into being, a consumer.
Yeah. And I think, I grew up in Peterborough, and I went to school with farmers, or like the children of farmers. One particular sheep farmer's son who always smelled like sheep. But I mean, we were so connected to our food because we knew the people growing it. And that was like, that really shaped who I was. And I find in Toronto, I can still seek those out. There's still farmers markets, and there's still like so many amazing vendors that are doing fantastic things with food, but you don't see them. Like, it's just not as visible, and it's not as focused on, because we're just so busy here, and we're so like literally separated from nature as well, I think, in a big city.
Yeah, I would definitely say so, yes. Especially now living here and having lived there. Yeah, I just feel like there's such a stronger relationship out here between food. Just being able to go and literally purchase food right from a farmer, I feel like is such a unique experience for them to be able to tell you about their product, to see, like, I don't know, to put a face behind a product too. Just for me, it means something. I feel like we've lost that intimacy or that relationship with food over the years. A supermarket, it's convenient and everything's there under one roof. And I really appreciate that convenience. Don't get me wrong, but you have that, it creates a disconnect between your food and what you're eating. I really treasure that about Halifax. Like, as much as sometimes I really don't enjoy its small town vibes, I guess. One thing that I really do love about here is the sense of community and the sense of supporting local, and especially in terms of farmers. Everybody, the farmers market is packed every week, and people are selling out, which is amazing. I just think it's a really beautiful thing over here.
Yeah, it sounds like it. And my brief time there, I noticed the exact same thing. Like, you just feel very welcomed, and it is a community and not a city.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes.
And actually, I'm going to ask you one last question.
Sure.
What is the weirdest food you've ever had?
Oh. I'm sure there's many weird things that I have eaten, but something that has always really resonated with me because it was so, I feel like offside from anything I'd ever tried before, was when I first went vegan and I was reading Alicia Silverstone's Kind Diet, and her diet really emphasizes the principles of a macrobiotic diet. And one thing she talked about was eating pickled foods. And she suggested that we use umeboshi vinegar in a lot of our recipes, or umeboshi plums. So umeboshi plums are like a Japanese salt plum, or pickled plums. They are really, really salty, like arguably the saltiest thing I've ever had. And for me, it wasn't like delicious exactly. But most people don't just consume a plum on their own. Usually they are mixed into like a recipe. But I remember I ate one after dinner one time because they're supposed to be really excellent for digestion. So I was like, yeah, now I'll just eat a plum, like they look like maraschino cherries. So I thought, why not? Let's give it a whirl. But I was shocked, surprised. I don't want to say pleasantly surprised because I literally was like, holy crap. But it probably one of the weirdest things I've ever ate.
That's a good example.
Yeah.
That, like, you're not selling it at all as a good food to eat, but it's great.
I'm sorry for all the Mabushi farmers and companies out there, but for me, I think also because it's so contrasting to something that I have eaten in my everyday diet before that, I was like, it was practically a culture shock in my mouth. I feel like I was just like, holy, but yeah, it's really great for you. So I'll say that it's supposed to be great for you according to science, but yeah, just not the tastiest.
That's fair. Okay, so I'll offer you the floor. If there are any like community events coming up, or blogs or books or anything like that kind of relating to veganism that you'd like to share with us, then please let us know.
I don't have any blogs or anything, but I wanted to share this article that I found it on my computer here that I spoke to you earlier about. And it's a CBC News article, and like I said, the author's name is Sarah Bond, and the title is "The Activists Protesting Antler Restaurants Don't Speak for All Vegans." And for me, it just is such a great message. It's not a long article. If anybody's interested, they should definitely take a look at it. Talks about, rebranding veganism. And, one of the quotes that I really love, she says, "Veganism needs to be more than its current face of economic privilege, nonsensical protest, rigidity, and judgment. It needs a rebranding." And I think that it's such a true statement, especially given modern day protests, like we talked about, like outside of Antler, and which is what this article is referring to. I just feel like it's important to see the flip side of what those people are protesting and how other people see it too. Not all vegans think that type of aggressive protesting is productive. I personally don't. And yeah, I feel like sometimes we need to take a little more consideration when it comes to dietary choices, and maybe a little less judgment. I just feel like it's so judgy. Sometimes some vegans are just extremely judgy. And for some reason, they choose every opportunity to just lecture you on why it is you should be eating this and why you shouldn't. And as someone, I love being vegan, don't get me wrong. I'm not hating on vegans, but I just think that sometimes we could just be a little more considerate and a little more compassionate towards other people's choices. But yeah, check out that article. I think it's so great. Maybe you can link it in or something like that.
It'll be in our show notes for anyone that's interested. Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us and taking the time out of your day to share it with us.
Thank you very much for having me.
That was our interview with Rylee Booroff. Thank you so much, Rylee, for dishing your vegan story and experiences with us. You can find the links to her Toronto Star interview, the CBC article about vegan protesters, and the article by Dana Hart about veganism in the show notes below. Thank you so much for tuning in to Anthro Dish. We'll see you next time.